You're listening to Leading Up with Udemy. This podcast is your guide to developing your skills as an emerging or seasoned leader. I'm Alan Todd, your host and the Vice President of Leadership Development at Udemy. Together, we can work, lead, and live differently to create a better world. This week, I'm speaking with Hebba Youssef, the creator of the cheeky and inspiring HR newsletter, I Hate It Here. Hebba's newsletter is dedicated to HR professionals who need a little inspiration to tackle the newest dumpster fire of the week. With over 130,000 subscribers, I Hate It Here offers insights and advice on how to build companies and cultures that people actually love. In addition to the newsletter, Hebba is the Chief People Officer at Workweek. I was super excited to have Hebba Youssef on the podcast this week. She is an irreverent thinker about the future of work and leadership. I love her human-centered approach to thinking about the future. I think our listeners are going to learn some great ideas and insights that they can bring around human-centered leadership, about building trust, about empathy. Hebba, welcome to the show.
Alan, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I always say I'm so excited, but I really am always so excited.
All right. Well, that's fantastic. So I'm excited to hear exactly how you pulled off I Hate It Here. How'd you come up with the name? How'd you sell the idea? And how did you recruit 130,000 subscribers?
Oh, man. Well, the name is actually inspired by one of my best friends. She and I were chatting about work and all the things I don't like about work. And I said, sometimes I just really hate it here. And she said, that's what you should call the newsletter. And I said, a lot of HR people actually feel that way, but are too afraid to say that. And she was like, are you joking? You have to call the newsletter that. Like, you just clearly expressed it. If you're feeling it, I'm sure other people are feeling it.
Yeah.
So we went on to name the newsletter that. And I think the way we attracted so many people was I really just write the things that I'm thinking. And I explain exactly why I'm thinking them and how I've encountered them in my career. I share stories of managers yelling at me, leaders telling me no, microaggressions I've experienced, a gambit of things. And I think a lot of people appreciate how real it is, the feedback I consistently get.
Yeah, I love it. So how did you sell it to your colleagues at Workweek?
Oh man, they were not happy. My CEO tells a story, but he said, no, nobody will sponsor a newsletter that's called I Hate It Here. And I said, if you just try this, if you believe in me, believe that people will read it and the sponsors will want to be a part of this. And I think all the sponsors I've worked with to date have been people who really resonate with the idea that there is something broken at work and I deeply want to fix it. I get a lot of feedback that the name is negative, and I tell people it actually comes from a place of optimism because I don't want people to hate where they work. I want them to love it. But we have to talk about the hard things to actually fix them.
Let's talk about the hard things. You say that HR can be a soul-crushing place to work in. So why is HR soul-crushing?
We see the worst in people. We see the best in people, but we also tend to see the worst in people. And we're not always present for all the really special moments. Potentially, we're present for the really bad moments. Like if there's a performance problem, if we have to fire somebody, if somebody experiencing a life crisis and needs our help. We see a lot of things and it can really weigh on you. And we're also not really given the luxury of being emotional at work. Like, people tend to forget that we are also employees and we are experiencing potentially the same things that everybody else is experiencing, but we are tasked with fixing the problem as well. And that really starts to weigh on you because you're like, oh, I also hate this thing. Now I have to go fix it and I can't get the buy-in to fix it. And everyone else also is very mad about it. So am I, but now I have to fix it and I can't. And it just feels like that all day long.
So is it a thankless job? Is it thankless work? It sounds like you have all the bad and none of the good.
Okay. There's a reason I still do this job, and I will probably do this job forever. I'm deeply inspired by helping people have a better experience at work. And so when it does get really hard and it feels really thankless, I tend to remind myself, think about all the times I've impacted somebody's life and I've either given them feedback to help them navigate a tough situation, or I've coached them on how to be a better manager, and then they show up and do the thing. And the next time they tell me, I did the thing you taught me and it worked. And so it is really thankless. But then at the same time, when you see yourself making an impact on the people and the company, it's really hard. it's really hard to navigate those feelings. Yes, I don't get a thank you, but I also get to change people's lives.
Yeah, I get it. So it hits you at a more fundamental core kind of purpose, right? A reason for existing, which is great. What's a good example of a dumpster fire at work?
Some of them are confidential, Alan. I can't tell you all those.
Well, give me a generic one, like that one that you see as a pattern dumpster fire that people have to deal with. So, and let's take it apart and figure out, like, what is it? Why does it happen? And what is a new and better way to resolve it?
I think a big one that I see a lot is when people depart an organization, because it depends on what size you are at to what level of transparency you want to give the employees as to who's departing. And so this is a debate I think I've had with every CEO I've probably ever met and have worked with, is do we announce that people are leaving, or do we just let them fade away into the night and don't tell anybody?
And what's the answer?
I mean, again, I default to transparency. So I'm always tell the employees, especially if you're smaller, I would say if you're under 500 people, somebody's going to notice when someone is gone. And that feeling of someone disappearing is like really scary. And I think every time there's a departure, maybe because we're smaller, I feel this on a greater scale. Every time there's a departure, it's like a dumpster fire for me personally. At bigger organizations, less so. But especially if you have a leader depart, it becomes a really tricky game of what's the right thing to say? When do we say it? How do we assure everybody that things are going to be okay? And what does it look like to make everyone feel calm? Because I think departures give people a sense of anxiety.
And how do you balance not feeling like you're always a spin doctor? So in that scenario, I think a lot of people, companies put on all this spin, and the recipients see it as exactly what it is. It's almost like watching political talk shows on cable television. And when you talk a certain way and you see this positive spin on everything, it feels inauthentic to the receiver. How do you deal with that?
I think one of my core values is honesty. And so when I go into any of these situations, I try to be as honest as possible, knowing that there are certain things that are confidential that I'm never going to talk about. So I do tell employees, like, hey, we could tell you why somebody leaves, but if it's confidential, I'm not sharing any additional details. It's truly none of your business. And I think because I approach it that way, a lot of employees are like, oh, okay, she's really telling it straight. And we announce our departures every Sunday. My CEO has a newsletter. He puts any of our departures in the newsletter simply so everybody knows what's going on. And we're always very clear about they departed, here's what they're doing next, or we wish them the best of luck.
Is there any color commentary on why they departed? Like, we wanted them to go, they wanted to go, they're leaving and we're all happy, or they're leaving and we're all enemies?
Oh, I don't think we ever tell people when we're enemies with them.
Well, let's just say you leave. There are good breakups and there are bad breakups. I like your advice. So you're saying be honest and be transparent, which means you have to be authentic, which means I suppose you can put a positive spin on it, but people will see through it, but honesty. But I'm just wondering, so there are good departures and bad departures in all organizations and all relationships. What's the best way to deal with, we're sticking with just this one, our first dumpster fire analysis, which is departing employees?
I think there's boundaries to what you can say. So we don't tell anybody like, oh, we fired them for performance, because I think that's a very personal, confidential thing to the employee. I also think like there's a lot of things that go into performance. It's hard to say you fired someone just for performance. When someone departs and they tell us a reason why, and then we ask them, are you comfortable with us sharing that? And they say yes, we share it. We had someone depart because they truly weren't inspired by the job they were doing and they wanted to go back and do a different job. And they literally said in the departure note, they're really sad to leave. They love our culture. They love working here, but they actually just want to do something different. And you can contact them and hear more about their story. Maybe share their information. So I think there's boundaries to what you can and cannot say. When the employee tells us yes, I'm very happy for you to tell people that, we usually include it in the note.
Yeah, I like that. So you ask permission. Mm-hmm. And I think what I hear is honesty, transparency, ask permission, do it, obviously share nothing that doesn't need to be shared that might be confidential in nature or personal in nature. But the other, I think that's a great example of a tricky issue that I think a lot of managers and companies and CEOs deal with.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Ask anybody what their departure strategy is. And I feel like everyone has an opinion on it. Every single person I've ever encountered has been like, oh, no, we don't announce. Or someone else will say, absolutely, you have to. And I think it's just a very interesting conversation to see how people are defaulting to transparency or not.
Yeah, That's beautiful. Any of our listeners, you can talk to somebody at your own company. How do you all do it? And is it taboo? Is it secret? Let them depart and we don't talk about it. We pretend like they were never here, or do we talk about it? Nah.
The secret's the worst because your employees are going to find out regardless. And I'd rather share and be upfront about it than them wonder why and then have a lot of doubt that we are doing the right thing.
All right, so that was great. Can we do another one? Is there another dumpster fire? And again, just sort of a big thing that you see the pattern over and over, and it's a sticky, messy issue.
Oh, I think the return to work in general dynamic has been a big dumpster fire.
Yes.
Recently, Salesforce just announced that they want everyone to return, and they were one of the first people who said everyone can work remote. And so I think that is just an ongoing, feels like it's never going to end dumpster fire. And I think it's because my take on it is like, I work for a fully remote company. I believe in flexibility. I think it's the most inclusive policy you could have is to give your employees flexibility to choose where they do their best work. But I do think hybrid is the worst of both worlds. It's the worst of in-person and it's the worst of remote, and that is hybrid.
Wow.
But that is what a lot of people, the situation they're in.
Hybrid, if you asked me, is, without even putting judgment on it, hybrid is the de facto way forward that I see bearing out in the world right now.
Oh, I think, to be clear, I think it's awesome. That is also what I want, but it is the worst of both experiences put into one. And then you're trying to manage, potentially, if you're a hybrid company, you might have people who are fully remote, people who are fully in person, and people who come in a few days a week. You're now managing 3 experiences, and that as an HR team can feel impossible. How do you serve all 3 groups and make them all happy? Feels like an uphill battle. How do you handle like a bunch of people going to the office and half of them are on the virtual call and the other half are remote, and there's conversation happening in person, but the person remote can't hear it, and then they're trying to navigate, and then they're also trying to build connection and have a conversation. It's a lot.
But if that is going to be the majority way forward for companies that have employees where it's possible to work remote and it's going to be hybrid, what's the fix?
Oh, you have to double down on communication. I will say some blue in the face. Everyone is a bad communicator. Even I have opportunity to be a better communicator, and I write a biweekly newsletter and create a bunch of content, and I could still be better. You have to get really good at it, and you have to have guidelines for how you want things to run. So if you do have a meeting, you can't have 3 people in person and 3 people on Zoom. It's just not conducive. I think back to communication, a big part of communication is like how decisions are made. And I have found in the remote world, your amount of meetings have actually gone up, but our connection to one another is actually going down. Our loneliness is increasing, even though we're having more meetings. And I think the problem is that we don't know how to communicate about how decisions are made. So then we have a meeting. Then in that meeting, we focus on the decision and we lose the part of us that remembers we're all just people who are trying to connect with one another. And so I think like we're going to continue to see struggle around the remote world. I think people are going to demand that everyone return to the office, and it's going to create a lot of friction between employers and employees. And then there's going to be the people who are trying to actually figure out how to be a good hybrid environment.
So for the fully remote, just back to that, one thing that I've seen research on, I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago about Gen Z that are fully remote. They actually don't even have any thought that the workplace is actually a place where you can build relationships. Like it doesn't occur to them. That's kind of thing one. And thing two is they sometimes don't leave their house for multiple days at a time. So they, this survey. So that feels isolating and lonely. So where's the fix for if you're fully remote, which you are, and if that's better than hybrid, and hybrid's the worst of all? Like, how do you fix that?
This is a tough one. I think if you have people who are fully remote, being really creative about how you encourage people to get together is really interesting, because usually people are around hubs. So like we saw a lot of people left New York City, went to the suburbs of New York. A lot of people like left DC and went to the suburbs of DC. I think there's opportunity for employers to say, hey, all of you in the DC metropolitan area, all of you, here's a budget, all of you should try to get together at least once a month. and creating that unique opportunity. Now, we also have employees that are, I hate to say in the middle of nowhere, but in the middle of nowhere, Montana, and he doesn't have anyone around him. And we have encouraged him to try to reach out to get to know people in his community, and he travels to conferences, so he gets his fill that way. So I think it's starting to look different than it looked in the past, and coming up with creative ways to get people together, whether it be a twice a year company retreat or once a year company retreat or a quarterly event where people all on the East Coast meet up in one city. There's ways to build that connection that actually work. And then I think coming back to Gen Z, acknowledging that not everybody wants to have friends at work, also okay.
There are a lot of leaders that don't believe in remote work because they think it can't be done. Of course, Elon Musk is famous for this. You're either in the office 40 hours a week or you're goofing off, or 50 hours a week or whatever it is. So I'm wondering, there's two things about what you said that I think we have to understand. One is, what is the role of trust? Are we saying as a leader, I don't trust you? And the second is, you have an interesting idea that sounds very organic and bottom up, the opposite of top down, which is, why don't you all figure out how you need to meet? And here's a little budget and just go do it. And we won't have a structure or a strategy or a place or a rule or a thing that says that you all must meet every Wednesday. Everyone has to come in. It's like the old, you will come in and you will like it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this bottom-up idea, because it's potentially very interesting, but I think it's scary to senior leaders, and I think trust is an issue.
If you can't trust your team to get their work done, I think that's where you should start. It's not about where they're doing the work, it's if they're getting the work done. I trust my direct report to get the things done that she needs to get done in a day. I don't care if she wakes up at 6 a.m. to do it or gets it to me by maybe 6 p.m. As long as it meets the deadline that we have set and we have set expectations and we agree upon it, I don't care if she goes to the beach for half the day. I don't care. It needs to get done. And that, I think, is because I trust her. I trust her implicitly to understand that we have these expectations, we're going to meet them, and how she gets there is her choice. And I think that freedom is the freedom that everyone is craving. We are adults at work. If you are treating your colleagues like they are children and they have to sit in a room and be watched to complete their work, I say you have some bigger problems at hand. And it should really start with, why don't you trust your employees to get the work done?
There's another factor at play. I watched 2 decades of the quality movement, from total quality management to Six Sigma. And in Six Sigma, there's a famous concept called DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. But essentially, look at the last letter, C, in that, and what the word is, control. All managers were taught for the last 20 or 30 years, maybe 40 or 50 years, that control is what you do. You bring order to chaos. And so trust and empowerment, let people figure out where to meet and when to meet and how to meet, is chaos, right? It flies in the face of control. So how are we going to square that? I think there's a tension there that has a half century of control built into it, and a half decade of experiments with something that feels more chaotic, but I would think of it as bottom up or more organic. How are we going to fix that?
I think we're in this new wave of management that started during the pandemic, because during the pandemic, I'm going to be really funny right now for a second. There's a reality TV show called Big Brother, and their motto is expect the unexpected. And I laugh about that, but that was literally us during the pandemic. You didn't know what was coming. You couldn't figure it out. And so I think managers were suddenly tasked with operating in an unknown environment. And I think that control part of management almost got scaled back. And instead, in its place, became the empowerment and wellness part of being a manager. I care about you. I care about your happiness, your success, because what we've all learned and read the studies on are, if you are happy at work, if you feel satisfied, all of that is going to drive your motivation and your productivity, which is ultimately what we want. I think it's interesting watching yourself tell someone to do something versus seeing the person motivated to do it before you even have to tell them are two separate things. I think managers of the past, it was very much like, you must do this. I have to watch you do it. Managers of the future are going to say, how can I support you in all the challenges you're facing so that your work gets done? It's less about dictating and more about caring about them. And I feel silly saying that because that's like a very feelings-oriented thing. And you just referenced Six Sigma, which is like decades of research they did to prove it. But I think that's what the next wave of managers should look at. How do I care for the person I am managing? And how does that care help them show up to do better work?
If we go all the way back to the universal truths of personhood, humanness, what makes us human, if we go to moral philosophy, the answers are quite clear that everything you just said is what people crave, right? We crave agency, self-determination. All humans require that, and that has happened since the existence of time. So I think you're directionally, it's a really interesting way to think. And I think that's the direction that we're heading. And maybe we need 5 decades of thinking about a more human-centered approach to leadership to balance and offset the control-oriented Six Sigma, which is also great. It's just that you need both. And we overplayed one and we underplayed the other. It would be my reflection. Sounds like, your insights are beautiful there. So another area where trust comes into play that frustrates people and builds dumpster fires is performance management process. I don't know that I've met anyone that goes, you know what I love? Managers. I just love doing performance reviews of people. And I don't think I ever met a person that reports to a manager that goes, you know what I love? Getting reviewed by my boss.
No one.
So why is managing performance so difficult? I know this is a topic you and I have talked about. It's just something that you think a lot about. So tell us why it's so painful first.
Yeah, well, so my second newsletter ever, I will never forget this. It was my second edition. It was about performance management. And the headline was, Performance Management Doesn't Actually Measure Your Performance. And then it started trending on Hacker News, which I was like, those are my people. Like, the techies get it.
Yeah.
It doesn't measure your performance. Performance management at its best is just a habit we've all convinced ourselves we needed to do. And I think 2 years ago, Google employees actually, I don't want to say rioted, that's a strong word. They didn't want to do the biannual review anymore. And they made such a noise about it that Google actually went back to the once a year annual review. And I think that's a trend we're going to see continue, either a once a year review or no review at all, because performance management at its core doesn't actually measure anything. It's a perception-based assessment of somebody's performance. And they have done studies. Textio just released their 2024 language analysis around performance reviews. And there's a lot of things that you can uncover from just the language people use in reviews. But what we have found is women get less performance-based feedback and more personality-based feedback. Underrepresented groups get less actionable feedback. White men and Asian men are more likely to be described as like ambitious and leaders versus women and other people from different groups. And so I think uncovering all of that and thinking holistically about like, how do I get my employees to want to show up and perform really well? I don't think the answer is put them through a review process that makes them feel awful about themselves. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's definition as well of high performance is different. And it also comes from a place of bias. And that's the thing, like, bias doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make you a good person. Everyone has it. We all had a lived experience growing up that informed our perceptions of the world. And unfortunately, that lived experience and what we had exposure to actually impacts how we behave in the workplace and how we're able to give feedback. So I just think performance reviews in itself are like a deeply flawed process that don't actually bear out anything better.
Yeah. So I think it goes back to that same thing about just human nature. It's in our human nature to probably struggle with this concept. And so that will always be, I would say, for eternity. So we're being taught in the workplace that you have to do this and you have to learn to accept it. And if you don't, you're just lacking self-awareness, or you're lacking the confidence to hear self-awareness. You have an ego of that. So what does a new model look like? Let's just say manage for performance. Maybe there isn't a performance management process. I don't know. What is it?
Yeah. So at Workweek, we do something a little interesting. We do something called a Feedback Friday. So every 2 weeks, the manager and the direct report meet to give each other feedback. And it's not just one directional. So the direct report, my direct report answers questions about me, and I answer questions about her. And the whole goal is to make it a collaborative process where feedback is being shared. We've been testing that for like over a year. We get really good responses from it. Managers say it's been really helpful. Sometimes they say like every 2 weeks is too frequent. I'd rather it be once a month. But I've really encouraged them, like, your feedback deteriorates at the 2 week mark. You can only remember like a running 2 weeks of feedback. So you should do it every 2 weeks just to make sure you're doing it. And it shows you that you're committed to your performance and your direct report's performance. So that's one thing we do that's like a little different. I think people at first were really hesitant to try it. And then everyone started seeing, oh, wow, every 2 weeks, me meeting, talking about feedback, it's actually helping me. It's helping me uncover like themes of development opportunities. It's helping me make sure that I have that strong relationship with my direct report so that when I give them feedback, suddenly their alarm bells don't go off. So we tried that. And this year, so after doing that for about a year, this year we introduced like a mid-year reflection. And it's similar. I mean, it's a performance review, for lack of a better word, but it's actually more reflection based. So it asks people to reflect on what they've achieved, the 2 achievements that they think contributed the most value to the organization, and areas that they want to grow and develop. And so it's meant to be more of a reflection, less of a here's how you're performing. And the reason I felt okay doing that was because we had been giving weeks of feedback. Like, we had been practicing giving feedback for a year before we even did this. And I think it's like a different, more iterative model of performance that can help you actually get to the root cause of what is it that needs to change. Because I think that's the thing about performance that everyone anchors to. They want to know who the high performers are, and then they want to know what has to change. But if you're giving feedback regularly every 2 weeks, potentially you've already accomplished that.
And in practice, do these feel like a dialogue? Does it just feel like a conversation, or does it feel like it's more informal than feeling like a performance review?
It's meant to feel very informal because I want it to start to feel natural. What I'm trying to do is build a habit of feedback, because the problem with performance reviews is often it's not a habit at the organization to give feedback. So you get to your biannual or your annual review, suddenly you're dropped in this high pressure situation that you're getting feedback potentially for the first time, things you've never heard. And that feels so deeply unfair. And I just know that the second you do that, the employee is going to slowly start to disengage. They're going to slowly start to pull away, and they're going to lose trust. And so that's really meant to make it a natural habit so that when someone says, hey, I have some feedback I want to share, your alarm bells don't instantly go off. It more becomes, oh, this person is trying to help me grow. They're not trying to make me feel bad about what I've done. They're actually invested in my growth.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of work on growth mindset that goes to the idea that everything we do is about growth and having that sort of positive view of growth. And I think if you take that positive view, we can get better.
It's definitely different. Listen, like, will I say it's perfect? Possibly not. People still struggle to give feedback. If I were to say to train managers and leaders on anything in the world, I would say it's feedback. And it's not one training. It should be like a year's worth of training because people are so bad at it. And our goal at Workweek is, my CEO has this like vision that he wants everyone to work there for like 10 plus years, which when he told me, I said, that's wild. If you read the data about average tenure length, nobody is staying anywhere 10 years anymore. Gen Z will quit a job in 6 months. And he said, but I want to build a different environment here, and I want you to help me do that. And I want it to be focused around people's growth. I want people to feel like their careers are changing dramatically when they come to work here. And so that is why I've been able to try a lot of the things I've been able to do, because we really want people to grow. And I think that informs everything we do.
So as you think about the workplace, the dumpster fires, the happiness at work and building a happier workplace, I saw a study from EY, the global consulting accounting firm, of Gen Z, 1,500 Gen Z. Almost half said they're very or extremely likely to start a business. And you and I chatted before, and you said you think we might see a boom in entrepreneurship, and not in venture-backed tech, but in small business. So I want to unpack that a little bit. Why do you think more people will start a business in the future?
We want autonomy. We crave autonomy. There's also another study about how CEO salaries have grown exponentially and stock buybacks are the highest they've ever been. Investors are making money hand over fist, but the average American salary has not grown at the same rate. And look at the cost of life and living and inflation and all the things that contribute to your quality of life. I think people are going to pursue being entrepreneurs because they want control over their destiny. They don't want to show up to work and do work for a corporation that potentially is going to make more money than it's ever made before. And then the employee turns around and gets a 3% raise.
So is it an equity issue? Because that's equity.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is equity. They want ownership over what is theirs and their work. And I think that drives people to pursue entrepreneurship because they want to feel the impact and be rewarded for the effort of their work.
So autonomy and their fair share.
Yeah.
So that might drive change.
No offense, there are a lot of bad leaders in the world and a lot of bad managers. And I think once you experience one, you start to think to yourself, wait a minute, I would be a better leader than that person. Maybe I should try it.
So, Hebba, one of your core values is curiosity. So one question that we ask all of our guests is, what are you curious about and learning now?
This is going to feel like such a cop-out answer. It's not intended to be, but AI. I am fascinated with where AI could impact HR. I have yet to see a decent amount of studies on how it's going to change the industry. And I'm now reading more articles about how AI is not proving out to be as lucrative as a lot of the investors thought it was going to be. And so I'm curious, how is that going to play a role in our future? Are we going to continue to try to push everyone to automate, to learn more about generative AI? Or are we going to start to say, ooh, maybe that's not what we should be doing? It's also risky and very unethical at times. So I'm very curious about AI.
Oh, that's beautiful. And the stakes are high because if I look at PwC and Goldman Sachs, both have studies that they've done that they see somewhere between $7 and $15 trillion in GDP growth that they attribute to AI. So time will tell if any of that's real, but certainly the stakes are high.
I'm fascinated.
Fascinating. All right. Hebba Youssef, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Yay, thank you so much. I had a fabulous time.
Thanks again to Hebba Youssef for joining us today on the podcast. Follow Leading Up, a podcast from Udemy Business, wherever you find your podcasts. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode to help you level up your leadership skills. Follow the show so you never miss an episode. And if you like the show, leave a rating or a review. We'd love the feedback, and it really helps us to find new listeners. To learn more about Leading Up or how Udemy can help you develop leaders at scale and move business forward, visit business.udemy.com. The Leading Up podcast is produced in partnership with Pod People. Our original theme is by Soundboard.